good, only semi, which is fine as a brand-like name. Now I'll lengthen slightly to reach the 13,000 to 15,000 range by deepening existing mechanisms. Length and content checks pass, 13,377 characters, only semi as an uppercase cluster, no band punctuation or phrases. Here's the final script. 50 machines, each one the size of a delivery truck, make up the full tool order for one mid-sized logic fab. In 2019, nearly every machine on that list carried a foreign logo. Applied Materials, Lam Research, Tokyo Electron, ASML. 5 years later, in 2024, China spent more on chip-making equipment than any country has ever spent in a single year, roughly $41 billion, and a rising share of that same 50 machine list now carries a Chinese nameplate instead of a foreign one. One line on the list has not moved at all. This is a reading of that shopping list at 2 dates, then a count of which lines changed and which line refused to. 4 categories shift, 1 does not. The first reading is the whole spend curve, the envelope every other number sits inside. In 2020, China's total fab equipment purchases ran roughly $18.7 billion. The year China first became the single largest equipment buyer on the planet by the industry tracker SEMI's published figures. By 2024, that figure had climbed to roughly $41 billion, a record for any country in a single year, per the same tracker. 18.7 billion then, 41 billion now. The total roughly doubled across 4 years that also happened to be the years export licensing tightened hardest around what foreign firms were allowed to ship into that very spend. The restriction targeted specific tool classes and specific advanced nodes, not the size of the spending envelope itself, so mature node and trailing edge capacity kept absorbing record sums no matter which supplier's name ended up on the invoice. Much of that record sum went into building out capacity for chips that do not need the most advanced node at all, the sensors, power components, and display drivers that still run perfectly well on a process generation from years earlier, a segment the restriction was never aimed at in the first place, and one the spending figures do not separate out from the rest. Move down from the total into the deposition line, the machines that lay down the thin films a chip is built from layer by layer. At the 2019 inventory, domestic deposition suppliers held a marginal slice of most fabs' procurement lists, with foreign vendors carrying the large majority of line items by value. By the 2023 to 2024 window, Naura Technology Group, China's largest toolmaker and a major supplier across both deposition and etch, reported annual revenue near 22 billion yuan, several times what the company was reporting at the start of the restriction era, a marginal slice then, several times the revenue now. That is not a percentage point of share, it is a company's own filed sales figure, and it tracks a rising, though independently unverified at the percentage level, claim on new procurement. The mechanism behind that climb is tolerance. Deposition steps at mature nodes and even at many advanced logic and memory steps are forgiving enough that a tool running one generation behind the foreign benchmark can still be qualified into a live production line without disqualifying the chip coming off it. The etch line runs the same arithmetic. Etch tools cut the patterns deposition just laid down, and in 2019 that category showed a similarly marginal domestic footprint, concentrated mostly in mature node and trailing edge lines. By the 2023 to 2024 window, Advanced Microfabrication Equipment China and its domestic peers report a comparable multi-year run of steep revenue growth in their own annual filings, alongside expanding qualification into both mature and a portion of advanced node Chinese fab lines. The order of magnitude tracks deposition closely, running on the identical underlying mechanism. Being a process generation behind in etch costs yield, not eligibility, so a domestic substitute could enter the order book without first matching the foreign tool spec for spec. 2 categories climbing on the same logic, in the same window, off the same kind of forgiving tolerance. Inspection and metrology sit one rung higher in difficulty, and the reading there moves slower. In 2019, this category was almost entirely foreign supplied, considered the hardest for a domestic entrant to crack, because a metrology tool has to measure to a precision finer than the thing it is checking, not merely process it. By 2023 and 2024, domestic entrants had begun shipping qualified tools into select Chinese fab lines, but independent trackers consistently placed this category's domestic share behind both deposition and etch, describing the remaining gap as substantial rather than closed. Real movement, slower movement. A climb, not yet a catch-up. The reason sits in what the job actually demands. A deposition or etch tool that is merely close enough can still hold acceptable yield. A metrology tool that is merely close enough has, by the definition of its own job, failed at it, which raises the qualification bar for a substitute far above what deposition or etch ever required. There is no partial credit in a measurement tool. Either it tells the fab the truth about a layer that is a few atoms out of specification, or it does not, and a fab that trusts the wrong reading does not find out until the finished chips fail testing weeks later, by which point the wafers underneath that bad reading are already gone. Then the lithography line, the one the entire restriction was written around. In 2019, the Dutch government, acting under pressure from the United States inside the Multilateral Export Control Framework, blocked the Netherlands-based lithography maker ASML from shipping its extreme ultraviolet scanner into China, the single machine required to pattern the most advanced logic nodes. By 2023 and 2024, those controls had widened further, now covering additional immersion deep ultraviolet models as well, and by outside industry accounts, China's homegrown lithography effort, led by Shanghai Microelectronics Equipment, has not shipped a tool independently verified as capable of high-volume production below an older process node band. Blocked in 2019, still blocked in 2024, effectively flat. Of the 4 categories on this inventory, 3 bent toward China and 1 held exactly where the 2019 decision put it. The mechanism for that one stuck line is precision, not policy stubbornness. A lithography scanner is the single highest precision machine inside the entire fab, built from optics, motion control, and light source engineering that took its maker and an entire continent's worth of precision manufacturing supply chain multiple decades to assemble piece by piece. It is the kind of machine a substitution strategy cannot shortcut the way it can shortcut a deposition chamber. Picture a kitchen told it can no longer import one particular imported oven brand. The kitchen does not close. Within a few years, it is welding its own ovens in the back room, crude at first, then good enough to run most of the menu, mature dishes especially. But one dish on that menu needs a custom broiler that only a single factory on the planet has ever learned to build to the tolerance that dish requires, and no amount of backroom welding gets the kitchen that broiler. Every other oven on the inventory, China is increasingly building itself. That one broiler, it is not. Behind all 4 of these lines sits a funding mechanism worth naming once. China's National Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund raised roughly 344 billion yuan in its 3rd phase in 2024, specifically aimed at financing this exact substitution, the deposition, etch, and inspection lines climbing while the state waits on lithography to find its own opening. 344 billion yuan committed, $41 billion already spent in the same year. The 2 figures describe the same push from 2 different angles. One is the war chest, the other is what already left the building. A rising share of spend is not the same fact as match performance, and that gap is worth sitting inside for a moment. When foreign supply got rationed behind license requirements, Chinese fabs had every incentive to qualify a domestic substitute even at a real quality discount, because a slower machine that actually ships beats a faster machine stuck waiting on an export license that may never clear. The share curve climbing in deposition and etch measures order books filling. It does not, on its own, measure a domestic tool's benchmark closing the gap against the foreign machine it replaced. The lithography stall is the load-bearing fact in this entire account, not a footnote sitting underneath it. Every other tool in a fab can lag a process generation behind, and the chip it helps build still works, just at a lower yield or a higher cost per good die. A lithography scanner that lags a generation behind does not lower yield. It disqualifies the entire fab from the node it was trying to reach in the first place. That difference is why the share curve everywhere else can climb steadily year over year, while this one line sits exactly flat. The restriction concentrated itself on the single machine where falling behind is not a discount on quality, it is a wall with no door in it. There is a 3rd reading worth naming, separate from the share numbers themselves. China becoming the single largest buyer of equipment from the very firms it was being restricted from buying it from is itself a fact worth sitting with. The controls did not shrink the size of China's order. They shrank the share of that order foreign firms were still permitted to keep, which is a narrower outcome, and for Applied Materials, Lam Research, and Tokyo Electron specifically, a more survivable one than an outright collapse in China revenue would have been. The number that moved fastest across this entire account is not China's import bill. It is the portion of that bill foreign suppliers no longer get to keep for themselves. Before settling on a single reading, 3 caveats deserve a place in the count because each one could make this delta look larger or smaller than it actually is. The first is claim against proof. Most of the domestic share growth measured here comes from company revenue filings and procurement counts, not from independent third-party benchmarking of tool performance against the foreign machines being replaced. A rising sales figure tells you a tool shipped and was paid for. It does not by itself tell you the tool matches its foreign counterpart at the process step it was bought to run. The second is missing independent data. Estimates of China's domestic equipment share vary meaningfully from one analyst house to the next because Chinese customs and spending data are not broken out tool by tool in any public form. Every percentage used to describe this trend, including the qualitative ranges in this account, is a reconstruction built from partial signals, not a government-published figure anyone can audit directly. The third is the node limit underneath all of it. A large share of the domestic tools qualified so far are running mature node and trailing edge production, where tolerances are looser and a tool running a generation behind can still hold acceptable yield. The climbing share number says comparatively little yet about whether these same domestic tools can be pushed into the tightest, most advanced logic and memory nodes, where the lithography bottleneck caps the entire stack, no matter how well deposition and etch perform underneath it. Put those 3 together and one honest reading survives all of them. The equipment list is genuinely diversifying everywhere the precision bar is forgiving, and that diversification is real money changing hands, not a propaganda figure. But the list's single highest precision entry, the one entry where being close is functionally the same as being absent, is precisely the entry the 2019 restriction was written around, and it is precisely the entry that is still not moved. 4 categories on this 50 machine inventory bent toward China between 2019 and 2024, deposition and etch climbing fastest, inspection and metrology climbing slower but still climbing, total spend roughly doubling along the way to that record $41 billion. One category, the one demanding the deepest and most singular precision lineage on the planet, sat exactly where the 2019 restriction left it. The restriction did not stop China's equipment spend, and it did not even stop most of China's equipment substitution. It stopped one machine, and that one machine remains the gate standing in front of the most valuable nodes the industry is racing toward. 3 doors on this list swung open, 1 stayed bolted, and it happens to be the only door that matters for the chips everyone is actually racing to build. The next inventory check lands around 2027. The date several domestic toolmakers have publicly named for crossing the halfway mark of share in deposition and etch on mature node fabs. Watch whether that mark gets hit on schedule, and watch far more closely whether the lithography line has moved by even one independently verified node. If you want that next reading the moment it is taken, subscribe and turn notifications on. This channel exists to measure the gap, not guess at it.